Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. Off to a slightly late start tonight, but man, I've been working like a locomotive, like a steam engine. By the way, speaking of locomotives, when I was in up in Michigan a couple weeks ago at Northwood University, one of the guys who picked me up was from the airport. Was a student who was really into trains, and he was on weekends. He basically fired up this gigantic, awesome coal-powered steam locomotive and just rolled it around for a while. And said he had a business plan to buy 3 diesel locomotives, and he wants, as soon as he's got his eye on a gigantic, enormous steam locomotive, a big one. I think it's $1.5 million or something. But I thought that was such a cool thing, you know. And he was talking about how you had to fire the engine, you know, going up, getting ready to go up a hill, and keeping the steam consistent and stuff. I just thought the idea that somebody was playing around with an actual, honest to God locomotive was really cool, and I was surprised at how many people own them. You know, there are a lot more out there than I thought. I think his name was Sheldon, Laura. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. Nice guy, very smart guy, and so there you go. So let's see. Needless to say, been a rough week here. Rough week for everybody with the Las Vegas thing, and there's simply no way for me to say what I'm about to say without sounding like the world's worst human being, and I just can't think of another way to convey the information. But we had prepared to launch a really fun and cool ad campaign about the zombie apocalypse, and Natasha shot video of me out at the range. We were out at the range for about 3.5 hours, during which I shot for about the 3 minutes that were on camera, and she shot the rest of the time. I think she shot 600 rounds or something. She's lost her mind. Honey, you've got to get this under control, baby. She's a crack shot, and I bought her a little 22 pistol. In any event, we were there. I was out on the range with an AR-15, talking about how the zombie apocalypse starts in Blocktober 2nd, which would have been Monday. And I wake up in the morning to get this thing rolling, and I find, you know, the Las Vegas thing. So I think that had to come down a little bit, needless to say. But it was, you know, it was just weird. It was weird. That coincidence was also strange, a little strange, that Monday was the first day that I wasn't working for the NRA. And Dan Bongino was taking over for me in the morning, and he was perfect. He was a perfect guest to have for that, you know, former Secret Service guy. It was just tremendous analysis. But in any event, I hope that we can start it tomorrow or the next day. We will absolutely have it started by Monday, but I'd like to get it done before then. The general theme of this is going to be that there's a zombie outbreak at YouTube, because YouTube is suppressing conservative videos, and we decided to go, hey, it's Halloween, you know, let's do this whole zombie outbreak thing. And we got some really, just some very cool graphics. In fact, let me see if I have one. This should only take 45 minutes of dead air or so. I just want to know if I can remember where I put them. I don't know. It seems unlikely. Yeah, I think I'll give up on this while I'm ahead. You get to see them tomorrow. I'll post one of them to open up in the morning. So, you know, I think it's just absolutely horrific. Needless to say, what happened there, and you just, you know, I don't know what to say. We all three of us talked about it on 3 different episodes of Right Angle. So I guess you're going to get that aspect of it. I'm so tired of thinking about it. I'd really like just to, for a little while, think about something else, because it's just appalling. But the short form of what I talked about, I did it in a Nexus report. By the way, we do a Nexus report every morning now. The one great thing that the NRA experience taught me was that I could be in the chair for a regular time in the morning and a regular one in the afternoon. So every day now at 10 o'clock we shoot, or try to shoot, the Nexus Report. I say try to shoot because we do one every day for members only. And some days the news is jumping and it takes a little while longer to get it up there. But the one today I thought was very good. It was trying to figure out how do you determine what's fake news and what's real news. I'll probably make that public tomorrow morning, I think. And then I was talking about this idea on the Nexus Report, and it'll be on my right angle, which I don't think is quite out yet. Be out in the next day or two. I was talking about this idea of the shooter and how bad is this problem? And again, it's virtually impossible to talk about these kind of things without just sounding absolutely callous and heartless. So I don't, certainly that's not my intention. I have nothing but the deepest sympathy for the people who went through this, and I sure don't want to do anything that sounds like it's trying to minimize rather the impact of what it is. But I wanted to have an approximate idea of how sick the society is. And because we're told an awful lot by the left how sick the society is. And I was just walking around thinking, everybody says these guns are everywhere. And I thought, that's true. And there's anybody can get one of these guns. Essentially also true. And then it occurred to me, we're constantly talking about these things when they happen, and appropriately so. But if everybody can have access to these weapons, why doesn't it happen a whole lot more often? This is another one of those cases where you count the hits and never count the misses. You see spectacular, smoking wreckage from a plane crash, and you think, oh my God, I don't know if it's safe to fly, but, every morning you don't wake up and say, in the latest news, 40,000 aircraft landed safely yesterday. And so you don't have any perspective. And that's all I really try to do with this, or with anything really, is try to provide some kind of just general perspective. So I had the idea to think about if the American people were a product, and if a particular kind of failure of that product was one of these mass shootings, what level of manufacturing quality would we have? In other words, can we compare the failure of a human being, their catastrophic failure when they go out and shoot people? Can we get an idea of what percentage of people do that relative to the general population? Now, had heard about something called Six Sigma. The gist of it is that if you look at any kind of a distribution, you pretty much always get a bell curve. And needless to say, the middle of the bell curve is where most of the things are. And then there's a standard deviation, which is a sort of a scaled amount where you move one way or the other, depending on the size of the curve and the height of the curve and all that. So when you move to the right, let's say if you're trying to make things, let's say it's just height, the average height is in the middle, and as you move to taller and taller and taller, the curve goes lower and lower and lower. And the further out you move towards tall, the fewer number of people there are going to be. And one standard deviation is, includes another height, and then a second standard deviation is considerably taller people. By the time you get to 3 standard deviations, you're really looking at a significantly taller cross-section of the population. And so manufacturers use this technique. I'm sorry, I just don't often get a chance to just, block somebody on the first try. There you go. So the manufacturers have a quality standard called Sigma 6, or Six Sigma, rather, manufacturing. And what that basically means is, can you get a failure rate that's so far out on that bell curve that it is essentially zero? And Sigma 6 is a long way out there. Essentially, Six Sigma means if you manufacture a product to Six Sigma standards, you have products that work 99.99966 of the time. In other words, Six Sigma allows 3.4 failures per million units. 3.4 failures per million units. So I took that number and I took a look at 320 million Americans, multiplied it out, and the number came, I think, to 1,058, 1,062, something like that. So if we had 1,062 people not thinking about mass murder, but actually committing it, if we had 1,062 Americans out there shooting people, we would, as a population, we'd be a 6 sigma population. We'd have an astonishingly low failure rate. And that is a sense of the perspective on it. 99.99966% of the population, and in fact more, don't go and shoot things up. Don't go out there and blow people away. 99.99966% of the population. It's actually, as I say, better than that. Significantly better than that. So when you ask yourself, well, what can we do about this, or how can we stop it? There comes a point when you have to say, I don't know if you can. Let me rephrase that. It is unrealistic to assume that you will achieve perfection in anything. We've come as close to perfection as I think we can mechanically with the airline transport system in this country, where we have not had a large, a commercial-sized jet go down of one of the U.S. air carriers in the country in 16 years. Last time we lost a jet of any size was in 2001. That's astonishing. 30, 40,000 flights a day, I want to say, something like that. So when you look at each one of those flights as a successful product, the airline industry is extraordinarily, unbelievably successful in terms of their quality control. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be another one. And it doesn't mean that you can't say if there's another one, well, then there's obviously something fundamentally wrong with the airline industry. Because, at least as far as the safety is concerned, at what point does this become unreasonable? And Dave Big Booty, of course, has wins the internet for the day. He says he tries to get to 7 sigma because it's one higher. That's true, Dave. Excellent point. I think about the work I do. I realize it goes up to 11 sigma. Mine goes up to 11. But that's really it, right? I mean, we have the sense that anything that happens to us before we die in our sleep, surrounded by our loved ones at an advanced old age, anything short of that, at 80 or 90 preferably, or 100, is an avoidable catastrophe, and it's an outrage against God and man. And I don't think we have the right to expect that kind of thing. It's cold comfort, I know, to people who are victims of this, and that's an enormously difficult thing for me to have to come out and say. But sometimes I think people need to say something to put into perspective the hysteria and to show the unreasonableness of it. As mentioned on one of my other one of the first, I think it was the first Nexus Report, the one I did Monday right after I heard the news, that, if you think about, well, what can we do to prevent these things? You say, well, if we banned all the guns and then I just stop myself, it's like, stop right there, Bill, That is not going to happen. It's not a question of it won't happen politically. It is impossible. There's 320 million people and more weapons than that. They're not just going to disappear. You can't start from a place. It's like saying, well, let's sit down and design our economy with the assumption that all of us can fly to work using the wings that are on our back. It's just, you can't design a city that way. You could, but it wouldn't do you any good in the real world because it's simply not possible. So there it is. I think for me, the situation in Vegas reminds me that there are things that happen out there that are horrendous, that there's nothing that can be done, I don't think, to stop it. Apparently this guy had bomb-making materials in his house, although there's an awful lot of awful lot of rumor and unconfirmed stuff going around right now. But we try to protect ourselves, and we try to do everything we can to protect ourselves. And yes, I agree. But to expect that that nothing bad is ever going to happen to us is just not realistic. And I think it's a real reflection on the society in a negative way, and also in a positive way, in a good way. In a good way, simply because we've been so successful that that we actually think that we actually get the impression that that we have a right to live in absolute safety and absolute security, where nobody gets hurt and nobody's killed in drunk driving accidents or dies of any particular disease. It's all assumed. It's I keep coming back to my friend Evan Sayed's term, the Kindergarten of Eden. That's really what it is. It's a world that's so detached from the realities of the real world that it seems like Disneyland, and nobody wants to get hurt at Disneyland. So when that kid got eaten by an alligator, I guess it was in Disney World, who can imagine such a thing? But Disney World's in Florida, and so are alligators. And how often does it not happen? These are all the things I'm just trying to say, because people sure do get hysterical about this stuff. All right, so we're going to do I kind of feel real comfortable with this 90-minute show, maybe 90 in a minute, pushing to 2-hour formats. So let's get started. I haven't seen them again, as usual. I'm looking at the order here as I just pulled it up, and the top question goes to Dave Olson, that miscreant. It says, going through my well-worn copy of The Demon-Haunted World, I noticed that the theory of man-made global warming, one of Carl Sagan's favorites, failed one of the steps in the baloney detector kit, argument from authority. Then I went back to the top and realized that the theory failed all the steps. Does this sound like something that could make a good firewall? It absolutely does. It's a great idea. The book he's speaking about is a book that was extremely influential for me. I really, on a lot of levels, that book taught me how to think about things, just how to think in a lot of ways. The Demon-Haunted World is a Carl Sagan book that deals with reason versus superstition, and it was I thought the whole book was a monument to reason, and I was so taken with it. I was so impressed with it. And Carl Sagan in there lays out something for what he called a baloney detection kit, which is a nice word, baloney. But basically, how can you tell if something's true or not? That's what I talked about today on my Nexus report that I'll make possible tomorrow. How can you tell if something's true or not? How do you know? Dave Olson points out that there is a bunch of steps that Carl Sagan outlined in order to see if something's true or not. And according to Dave, the theory of man-made global warming fails all of these steps, but Sagan was in favor of it. And how do you square that? Apparently, Sagan knew that that this whole idea of nuclear winter, that if there's a nuclear exchange that's going to put enough dust in the air from the fires that it will essentially extinguish all life on Earth, Sagan knew that wasn't true. But he was so concerned about nuclear weapons that he decided to support this movement and get behind it, put his name behind it, and his credibility behind it. That's the end of his credibility as far as I'm concerned. Anytime you have somebody like that who makes a statement that he knows to be untrue, and not only makes the statement, but basically makes political position on something he knows to not be true, has lost all of their credibility with me. And it's a shame, because I admire him very much. I admire the way he thinks very much, but there's that blind spot that so many people on the left seem to have. And the blind spot is, it's okay to lie about things as long as it's for a good cause, as long as you're advancing a cause of goodness, then it's okay to lie. Sagan thought it was okay to lie because he thought that there's a good chance the Earth, that humans were going to go extinct or suffer horrendous casualties in a nuclear war. I don't think he was right. I didn't think he was right at the time, but that's not the point. Even if he was right, even if there was consistent, firm evidence that stopping nuclear weapons was critical, to lie about it is just the end of your credibility. I occasionally say things that turn out not to be true, but I've never ever lied in my life on not on this show, certainly, not in the work I do. I've never ever once have I gone out there with something that I knew to be untrue. Not once. And so I was very disturbed by that. Sagan, however, in that baloney detection kit, had a sentence that I thought was just so profoundly good, so profoundly, astonishingly good. I'll never forget it. And it actually almost maybe comes back in a weird sort of way to what we were talking about a minute ago. So in this book, on this section on the baloney detection kit, hang on a second. Sagan sets up a thought experiment. And in the thought experiment, he has a friend come to him and say that there's a dragon in his garage. And Sagan basically writes the thing out in a kind of a role play kind of way, and it makes, it's pretty reasonable. His friend comes up to Carl Sagan and says, I have a dragon in my garage. Sagan says, needless to say, I'm extremely interested and excited, and say, so let's go look at the dragon. So they go over to the garage, and they look inside the garage, and there's nothing in there. And Sagan says, well, there's no dragon in here. And the friend says, it's an invisible dragon. And then Sagan says, okay, if it's an invisible dragon, why don't we just lay some talcum powder out on the floor, and when it moves around, we'll see its footsteps, and we'll be able to tell where it is. And the friend said, well, it doesn't leave footsteps. It's incorporeal. And then Sagan said, all right, well, why don't we get some kind of thermal imaging in here, and we should be able to see the flames of the dragon's hot breath. And then the friend says, but his flaming breath is not hot. It's not a hot flame at all. This is all special pleading. And then here's the line that just knocked me down. Sagan said, so what's the difference between an invisible, inaudible, incorporeal dragon who breathes non-existent cold fire and no dragon at all? What's the difference between these two things? I thought that's exactly right, isn't it? If you plead yourself all the way into the weeds like that, what's the difference between this guy's... let's say the guy was right. Let's just say, for the sake of the argument, he was right. Let's say in the garage, there was a dragon that was invisible, made no noise, didn't touch the ground, and blew fire that was perfectly room temperature. What's the difference between that and no dragon at all? No, there's no difference. It's a profound insight, I thought. I really thought so. And I was just brutally disappointed about this. Sagan also had a lot of things that he said politically fail his baloney detection test. And I actually wish I could spend a couple of hours with Carl Sagan and sit down and ask him questions about this. Why does it fail? Because I think he may or may not have been self-aware enough to realize his blind spot. If it was pointed out to him, you'd have to get him by the collar and really just kind of rub his face in it like a bad puppy and say, listen, you wrote this here and it seemed to me like you believe it. Now you said this isn't true. This fails this test. This fails that test. So why do you do it? And where I come back to this is, if somebody that bright can be blinded by these kind of things, then anyone can be blinded by these kind of things. And I find it to be a remarkably common thing in science for scientists to be convinced that they must make political statements because they have to exaggerate some of the data they're seeing because the data is alarming. Then maybe they think it's so alarming that they have to really do something about it. And so instead of telling us the truth, they just exaggerate things, thinking, well, it's all for the right reason. It's not. It's a lie. And I never really forgave him for that, honestly. And it taught me a very good lesson, and that lesson is that nobody is immune to bias. Nobody. And every now and then I'll catch myself. It's usually not political, but something else. I'll make an assumption about something, and I'm 100% sure of it. It's a minor little thing, and next thing you know, I was like, oh, you're wrong about that. Oh. So there you go. Let's see. Lee McCarthy asks, instead of talking about the horrible tragedy in Vegas or Trump in Puerto Rico throwing paper towels, would you please just tell everyone a good story? No death, no politics, just a good story about literally anything else. Okay, I will tell you a good story that I told my beautiful wife Natasha. And yes, by the way, I think we it's not like we just suddenly got married. We actually got married back in December of last year, and I didn't mean to be lying to people. I tried not to deny it. I just tried not to say anything about it. But it was a very, very small ceremony, and we are planning to have a bigger public one, which seems to be pushed back all the time. And so I would do shows, take the ring off, and because I didn't want to take energy away from the big ceremony. She deserves a big wedding, and she's been a photographer at hundreds of them, and she deserves that. And we just didn't get a chance to do it yet. So, in any event, I was down there at an event at TPUSA in Irvine last weekend, and it was time to take off the ring and go up on stage. And I don't want to take it off. I don't like taking it off. I never did like taking it off, and I don't want to take it off anymore. Screw it. So there you go. Again, I'm sorry to have to be misleading. Like I said, I tried very hard to make sure I never lied about it, but it certainly was annoying for me this whole time. So I think she's watching now, and she's probably reading the comments. So if you want to say hi, I think there's probably a pretty good chance you could reach her. And what this woman has done for me is indescribable, but I will say it's added 25 or 30 years to my life without question. I mean, it's just astonishing. I had no idea how unalive I was until I met her. I really had no idea just how barren my life was before she came along. It was really astonishing. I've been working late last couple days for the first time in a long time, but normally I go home, get there around 5:36, and I go outside and sit down on the back porch with my beautiful, talented, fun, crack shot wife. And we watch the sun go down, and we have little visitors that come at nighttime. Sometimes we have little possums. Sometimes we have raccoons, and it's just a little bit of paradise. I'm as happy as a boy could be. I wasn't joking about her being a crack shot, by the way. This I'll just show you one. If I'm going to embarrass her, I might as well embarrass her. Yeah, this is a person who has shot. This was, I think, her third time out at the range. I'll go with this one. Third time on the range, and where are you, you bloody picture? And the first time with her new pistol, I bought her a 22 pistol. I don't want to hear anything about people complaining about 22s. Why don't you just come to me? Just come on. Just go right there. There it is. She shot a 9mm, and first time ever it was back in August in a little underground private shooting range, and she loved it. And so we went out and took her down to Reading, which is a great, a really, really excellent gun store down here in Culver City, and bought a Walther 22 pistol. And after that, hang on a second. After we bought it, there's that 10-day waiting period, and so come on. So we, what's the matter here? So anyway, we basically went up to the range and we rented one, and it would. This software is just the worst. It's the worst software on the face of the planet. Hang on a second. By God, I'm going to get this right if it kills me. I am just going to get it right if it kills me. Change source. No. Change audio. Yes. Come on. Change audio. Yes. Rode Podcaster. Yes. Into preview. There it is. Okay, here we go. Finally. So we went up to Oak Tree, which is a great range, and we rented a 22, which had 50,000 rounds put through it. It was just a wobbly, really pretty bad piece of work. And she was just a killer shot with it. And then her pistol arrived, I want to say Tuesday night, last Tuesday, something like that. So then we went to the LAX shooting range, and what I'm about to show you is, I think 2 or 3 magazines each at a range of, what was it? 18 yards, I think. 18 yards, something like that. Here you go. Look out. Yeah, that's, I think 3 magazines to the center of mass and 3 magazines to the head. And this is not somebody you want to make angry. This is somebody who just started shooting. She's probably shot 2,000 rounds. And so I have this unbelievably talented, beautiful wife who, drags me out to the gun range once a week. Because she just can't get enough of it. She's terrific. Has some damn good shooting, actually, and I'm just so proud of her, and she's so proud of herself, and it's just tremendous. Jonathan K says, as Iraq veteran 8888 says, a 22 will kill the crap out of you. Yeah, it will too. Yeah, it absolutely will. If you got a 22, people laugh at it because it's such a small caliber. But if somebody's out there meaning you harm, you draw that weapon, you put 35, 40 rounds into that person, they're gonna start to slow down, and that's absolutely true. But anyways, just tremendous shot. She's just a natural shot, and it's incredibly crazy to watch. Steve Darrow says, can they own firearms in Russia? And the answer is essentially almost certainly not. Very few people get them. Criminals can get them, and the rich can get them. But generally, no, they're nothing like as common as they are here. In fact, it's very exotic. Several times we go to the range and we're driving down there, and she just looks at the pistol, and says, "I just can't believe this is real. I can't believe they let you do that." I said, "Yeah, that's the difference. That's what citizens are supposed to be for. It's why we're citizens." But they don't allow you to do it in Russia. But the thing that's really profound to me is her father. And I won't get into too many details because I didn't ask for permission to do this, but Natasha's father was a policeman in Russia. He was a forensic photographer, but he disarmed people. I think he'd been shot once and stabbed once. And he was just a good man. He's just one of those good watchdog people, sheepdog people, I should say, that just are out there to protect other people. And she thinks, and I think too, that she just thinks it's in her blood. I think whatever the case may be, her father would be very, very proud of her because she is extraordinary shot. And of all the things I liked about watching her, we went out last weekend as well. I remember when it seems like two events ago, like a week or 2 weeks ago. We'd have a jammed round. The 22 Walther's got a tendency to want to jam those rounds. However, it turned out that a liberal application of gun oil seems to have solved that problem. So thanks to the techs over, just the guy behind the counter at Oak Tree. In any event, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. Oh, I remember. In any event, 2 trips ago or 3 trips ago, when you would get a jammed round, she would just hold the thing like, now what do I do? We were out there last weekend, and these rounds were jamming pretty consistently until we got some oil in there. And so it's like click, okay, drops the mag, racks it, thing comes out, mag goes in, racks it again, she's ready to go. It's just like she's been doing it her entire life. So it was very, very impressive, and I'm very proud of her. I was shooting pretty well too, I have to say, for senior citizen. Okay, let's see. Your story, Lee. Sorry I got off the track. That wasn't the story. I'll tell you a story real quick. Natasha liked this story, so I'll tell you. It's not much to it, but I thought it was fun. So I didn't get to see a whole lot of my dad because as a hotel manager, he worked during the day and during the night. He'd come back for a nap probably around 5:30, and go back, be there at 7. So one time I was down there, and I just loved to play tic-tac-toe. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, something like that. And I loved to play it, tic-tac-toe. I played it all the time. I loved it. And my dad had a friend of his come down, and the friend played me in a couple rounds of tic-tac-toe, and I beat him. And he didn't let me win, by the way. I trounced him thoroughly using advanced analytical skills. But my dad said, Billy, that's very, very impressive, because James here is, in fact, the tic-tac-toe champion of Bermuda. And since you beat him, that makes you the tic-tac-toe champion of Bermuda. I was rather proud of that. I think it was the next day, might have been 2 days later. My father comes back home and has the Bermuda newspaper. And in somewhere around page 17 or something is a little box about that big, saying that Billy Whittle, having defeated the former champion, is now the official tic-tac-toe champion of the island of Bermuda. And I was just so proud of it. I just wore it around with me all the time. I also told her about a story that happened to me about the same time. I don't know how to explain this other than to say that it was one of those things that you think about when you're a kid and you don't think about so much when you're older. But I had seen, I'd seen the karate chop, which was very big in the 60s. It's kind of unusual. Nobody really knew it before. It's kind of exotic. It's what Japanese people did, or in order to knock out some gigantic guy. And this big guy's about to beat him senseless, and this little guy just goes, whoop, just a whoop, karate chop to the neck, and down they would go like the Vulcan nerve pinch every single time. Karate chop to the neck, down they go. And so I had been completely fascinated by the idea of this karate chop. And I took just a regular pencil, just a regular yellow number 2 pencil, and I held onto it on the side of a desk, and I went whoo like that. And I broke the pencil. And I was so impressed by this. I was absolutely, completely impressed. Well done. Well played, Eric Blake. The question was for a story, and we got 3. Any Lord of the Rings reference is extraordinarily welcome around here. So judo chop, as Dave Big Booty points out, judo chop, karate chop. Anyway, I chopped this pencil in half, so I got another pencil and did it again. And I thought, my God, I have superpowers of some kind. I mean, it's just obviously just this karate chop thing is magic. So I went to school the next day, and I broke probably, 15 pencils, and everybody was just absolutely blown away by this. And I was blown away by it too. I was absolutely sure I was actually, flying almost. It was just incredible feeling. And then I remember some kid said, it's not such a big deal, I said, what's not such a big deal? Breaking a pencil with a karate chop is no big deal. And he got a pencil out and just went, and just chopped it right off like that. And that moment is just etched in my head. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Because I was as surprised as anybody. I really was. I was as surprised as anyone to find out how easy it was. And anyway, there's your story that hasn't got anything to do with anything out in the news today, Lee. Susan Speakman is back. Was Heinlein wrong, given his quote below and his insistence that all the starry-eyed idealists are all male? I could argue that these days the woman is the ones who are genocidal. What say you? Here's the quote. All societies are based on rules to protect pregnant women and young children. All else is surplusage, excrescence, adornment, luxury, or folly, which can and must be dumped in emergency to preserve this prime function. As racial survival is the only universal morality, no other basic is possible. Attempts to formulate a perfect society on any foundation other than women and children first is not only witless, it is automatically genocidal. Nevertheless, starry-eyed idealists, all of them male, have tried endlessly and no doubt will keep on trying. Boy, you want to talk about a topical question. I was checking out Instapundit this morning and I saw an article and it said it had to do with the Las Vegas event. This is just another case of male privilege. And you go to the story, and it's a story of a woman who was there in the crowd. I think she'd been a waitress or actually worked at the Mandalay. And she was out there at the crowd, and when the firing started, these two guys basically threw themselves on top of her to protect her. And one of them got up and walked away, and the other one was killed. He was killed protecting this woman he'd never met before, and wasn't a friend, didn't know who she was, just did it. This is when, as my friend Phil Trick used to say, and he may be watching now, Phil, if you are watching, good to see you. This is what my friend Phil Trick said. Well, this is where the cheese gets binding. Because there were no documented cases of women throwing themselves on top of men to protect the men. Thank God. But if the feminists are right, then we should be seeing pretty much equal numbers of these things, right? 50-50. The women should be rushing towards the sound of gunfire, half of them, and half of the men should be running away. But it doesn't turn out that way. We saw this, the footage a couple nights ago, Natasha and I, and much has been made about this guy who was standing up and basically flipping the bird off to the guy who was doing the shooting, who's I try very hard to his name never to mention. And while that actual act is very brief, looking at it from a different angle, everybody's down on the ground, and this one guy in his late 20s, early 30s or something gets up, stands up, throws his arms out like this, and basically is saying, hey, you want to shoot at somebody? Shoot me, you son of a bitch. And I remember thinking, oh, the raw courage of that. And I also remember thinking, yeah, I get the feeling that's what I would have done. It's certainly what I would have wanted to do. Natasha always tells me how happy she is that it doesn't look like, that I didn't join the military or get into combat situations, because she thinks I'd always be rushing out there first to, try and drag somebody back or something and just end up paying for that. But both of those acts I admire enormously, enormously. I'm not saying they weren't going to assist Sarge, and by the way, it's an excellent point. There were some women running to assist. I'm saying covering somebody with your body to prevent them from being shot. That's a somewhat different story, I think. Anyway, I admire both of those acts enormously. I think these people are heroes, and for different reasons. The needless to say, the guy who's still nameless, who saved this woman's life, who he'd never met, at the cost of his own. That guy there needs to be a statue at that place with his picture on it. It needs to never go away. As far as the guy that stood up and flipped this guy the bird and basically stood there and became a target, it certainly looked to me that he was trying to draw this guy's fire. That's what it looked like to me. That guy, there needs to be a statue of him right there too, with his arms outstretched and his middle finger extended up at this biped who was pouring all this death and destruction down on them. It's just, nobody knows whether they're going to, nobody knows whether they're going to step up like that, or people who, endless times, you hear people who always consider themselves brave when the things really start happening. They're cowering in a corner, and people who were just very ordinary just suddenly find themselves out there doing heroic things. And it's interesting. We did our right angle, Steve's right angle this week was on some of the reactions on Twitter within hours of the shooting. Basically, attorney for CBS and a teacher both said essentially the same thing. Oh, I have no sympathy for them. They're Republicans. They support gun rights. So no tears for me from them. And I just thought, these people are reptiles, And the reason that I know that they're reptiles, as I said on the show, is because I make a living making political points, and I am not fond of the progressives. I think they do incredible damage. And for these people to say, well, I'm glad it happened. They were Republicans. They were asking for it. What makes me realize that I and most of you are just better people than them is when I heard about the incident in Charlotte where a Nazi, or at least somebody who was a sympathetic, there were Nazis at the rally, ran down a group of Black Lives Matter counter-protesters. And I remember hearing that story, and I didn't go, oh, good for you. I hope the Nazi kills as many as possible. My thought was, who got hurt? How badly? Let's get them help, and whoever did this needs to go to jail, charged with first-degree murder, and if they prove that he was intending to do it, then he needs to get the death penalty. I wasn't on the side of the guy who was killing the progressives. I was on the side of the victims, because this is just politics. It's not my religion. It's not my identity. Some of these people are just horrendous, horrendous people. And the point I try to make on the show as far as that is concerned is that the CBS high-level lawyer and vice president and the teacher speak that way because they always speak that way. They just basically tweeted those things out because that's how they talk every day. They talk like this every day in Hollywood studios. These Republicans, I wish somebody would just take them all out. That's what they talk about all the time. I know it's true because I heard it. And you can't tell me that attitude doesn't get into our news, and you can't tell me that attitude doesn't get into the heads of the children that person taught or teaches. So, crazy. Anyway, it was certainly been several days of trying to get down to brass tacks on things. Okay, Paul Rafflick says, I'd like you to speculate. I can do that. If the Founding Fathers, most notably George Washington, didn't want our country to be run, I guess, by monarchs or monarch types, why didn't they put term limits in the Constitution for the executive and legislative branches? In other words, why did it take until 1951 for an amendment to be put in our Constitution to limit the president to 2 terms in office? I can understand why people would want term limits in Congress, considering the fact that the more they get reelected, the less and less they represent their own peoples or the Constitution, and the more and more they represent themselves. Notable examples: Nancy Pelosi, John McCain, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, Sheila Jackson Lee, Maxine Waters, Lisa Murkowski, etc. When you look at the founders and the structure of the Constitution I think is perfect. They had such a clean understanding of human nature. Apparently, T.G. Gecko says that Hamilton actually did do that. But they could only protect themselves and protect us against the dangers that they could imagine. Clearly, they couldn't protect themselves or us or the country or the structure. They couldn't write into the Constitution things that they could not imagine. And there's a lot of things I think that happen today that they simply couldn't imagine. And I'm not talking about things like the internet or anything like that. I think the thing that is the most concerning to me of all of this is when I think about if these people were alive today, George Washington example, or Adams or Hamilton or anything. And I think if they saw what we put up with, if they saw how much we tolerate, they would be ashamed of us. And that makes me ashamed of us. They were, by and large, well-established, wealthy people, certainly in the case of Washington and Jefferson, although Washington's finances, and I suspect Jefferson's as well, were not terrific. These people owned estates. Anybody who's seen Monticello, that's not a poor man's house. So when you have a revolution and you're prepared to hang for it, and you've got something to lose, that's never happened before or since. So it must have been a pretty strong motivation, because these guys were not Les Miserables, gutter snipes. These people were living pretty well. And it was a philosophical objection, and it was one they took very seriously. And so I don't think they could have imagined communism. I know it seems kind of hard to believe, but I just don't think they could have imagined it. They imagined monarchies, they imagined tyrannies. They knew what they looked like, but the idea that people would become so soft and that it would take so long to just slowly lose the moral core, I think they must have simply not imagined it. Because when you hear what they say about these kind of things, their response is always pretty straightforward. The response is, well, you don't need term limitations because the people, if the representative's doing a bad job and not representing them, the people simply sweep them out of office. They will simply remove them. They said basically that the best reason that they didn't have to put in all of these little, restrictions into the Constitution, which would have destroyed the Constitution. Here's the things that you can't do. They said because every American will read the Constitution, understand the Constitution, and when they see things that are unconstitutional, they will essentially rise up in their righteous anger and throw the clowns out of office in the next election, if not sooner. And that's what they really thought would happen. And I think that basically was more or less the case for 2/3 or 3/4 of the length of this country. But those people are gone now. And when I think about what I tolerate, when I think about, $10 or $20 billion disappearing as a rounding error, they don't know where they misplaced it, but there's $10 billion, $10,000 million has gone someplace. And when I think about $20 trillion in debt, and when I think about all of this stacked up, and the fact that they take half of what I make when it's all said and done, about half, all across the board, I asked myself, why do we put up with this? And I realized it's because we're so prosperous, and part of that may be the borrowing, but we're so prosperous that even half of what we make, even for most of us, half or a quarter or whatever, doesn't impact us in the way that it doesn't appear to impact us the way that it should. If they launched this revolution because was it a 1 cent tax on tea? They found out that the government was taking 35%, 40%, 50% of everything you make, the federal government and the state. They simply they wouldn't believe you. They would say, well, why didn't you riot? Why didn't you vote them out of office? Twain talks about a visit, I want to say it was to Italy in The Innocents Abroad, which is 1866, I think. And he was talking about seeing a tax rate in Italy. And he said that if the tax rate ever got to 7% in the United States, the people would simply burn the Congress down. Well, 7% is a good long distance behind us. So they couldn't imagine it. I really do believe that they simply couldn't imagine it. They knew how to prevent tyranny and from people taking power, but they didn't really understand the power of it, although some people did. Certainly de Tocqueville did. He said shortly after the American Revolution, after the government was set up, he said, it's a magnificent thing, this American Republic, and it's genuinely astonishingly beautiful thing to see, but men are alive now who will live to see the end of it, because once they realize that they can vote themselves money out of the treasury, then essentially it's all over. And that's exactly what's happened. We finally had a political party that is determined to cling to power and have power, even if it costs the country. They'd rather rule over the ruins. So they vote themselves money out of the treasury to buy votes. I don't know what it comes out to. I did an episode on this once called The Vote Pump, but it's in excess of $1 trillion a year, $1,000 billion every year. Goes from people like us to people that are in many cases, Social Security they paid in and so on, but the politicians stole the Social Security money. But basically, it's about $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion goes into wealth redistribution every single year. And that's a hunk of change, That adds up. Trillion here, trillion there. So they'd just be mystified and appalled, and they would be deeply shocked and saddened that we let this happen. They'd be amazed by what they saw, and they would agree that superficially we don't appear to be restricted or tyrannized in any way that they would recognize. They wouldn't see the king's policeman down on the street or anything, not yet anyway. But the idea that all of this that we would consider ourselves to be free people when we basically have half of this stuff taken away from us without our permission, well, certainly not without our consent anyway. They take it with our permission because we don't want to go to jail. I think that would have shocked them. I really do. I think it would have really appalled them. And I don't like being ashamed of myself. I really don't. I don't know how you'd face them. I don't know what you'd say. I really don't. But that's who we are. So just Eric Blake says, dare I ask, why couldn't they imagine it? They couldn't imagine the idea that property that people would attempt to make everything communally owned. They'd never seen that before. Certainly the democracy they created didn't for a moment contemplate the idea that the government or the people will take everything there is and divide it up equally and distribute it to everything. It just never had happened before. Simply was inconceivable. What was conceivable was we'll work like slaves for the king. That's conceivable. He'll take all of our land. That's conceivable. He'll tax us into the poorhouse. That's conceivable. But the idea that the people themselves would steal from themselves is I just don't think they could have imagined. I think it was beyond them. I don't know. I almost said that I don't know that there's a human being on earth who's caused more death and destruction than Karl Marx. And I think that without question that's true. The question is, if it hadn't been Marx, would it have been someone else? Or was this just one of those cases where the timeline went wrong and somebody stepped on the butterfly and we're living in this hellish, alternate reality where the real world is beautiful and clean and happy and populated by all these wonderful people, and we're living in this world where Marx was born and 100 million people killed. By the way, it's another thing I was talking with Natasha about, talking about the quality of the people. I just can't stop reading about gulags now. It's all I get obsessed. I read Gulag Archipelago, read Kolyma Tales, and now I'm reading a book called Gulag, which is a much more kind of a academic analysis of them rather than a here's what it was like to live in them. But without question, this is the understatement of the history of the Stratosphere Lounge, but the people that went to the camps in the Soviet Union were by far the best people they had, by far. These were musicians, scientists, writers, poets. They were teachers. Anybody with any kind of an education or initiative almost certainly was going to end up there and had a very good chance of either being worked to death or shot, so one or the other. But poor Natasha was so sad thinking about what her country would be like if that hadn't happened. What would it be like if they hadn't taken all of the intelligent, sensitive, talented, kind people and put them behind barbed wire and worked them to death, and starved them to death until they die, which took about 2 or 3 months in the Kolyma gold mines, by the way. That's about the length of time it took to take a very strong and healthy peasant boy, 17, 18-year-old boy from out in the country in Siberia, strong as an ox, healthy as it can be. You put him in the Kolyma gold mines, working 12, 16 hours a day, and his life expectancy was 2 or 3 months. That's how long it took to kill a healthy guy. I don't know what you say about that. I really don't. Let's see. Yeah. Ian A. Little. Oh, let's just Ian a little, why don't we? Cool name. I don't believe we've heard from Ian before. Hi, Ian. How long will it be before private space flight creates self-sufficient colonies in space? I have hope that even if the world goes to hell Through civilizational collapse, we can have a reserve of humans in space that can remake society here on Earth when the time is right, as the difficult conditions of living off our planet will inevitably create a very K-type group of humans. There's a lot of assumptions buried in that, and this has been the sad thing of really the last several years for me. When I got to thinking about seriously going on this Aurora story, the Jupiter mission, and all the rest of it, I realized that the idea of it is a lot more romantic and pleasant than the reality of it. Space travel is essentially spending assuming you go out there as a colonist and not come back, it's essentially making a commitment to live your entire life inside a passenger jet. That's pretty much it. Certainly, if you're traveling a long way, the en route stuff is essentially you're living in a passenger jet of whatever particular size. The bathrooms are going to stay that size, and you can't leave. You can't go out. And when you put it that way, you begin to see the reality of it. I just am, as a person who was first in line for this kind of thing, who was absolutely ready to go, and who's still ready to go, I'd still go tomorrow without any question. I would go, certainly go into orbit anyway. It seems really cool. Oh, we're living in a spaceship. But if you've ever been on an 18-hour flight or even a 5-6-hour flight, you know that the idea of getting out of that tube is very, very important. And I think if you told people that they were going to go and not come back, that they were going to live like that forever, you'd have a lot of people who would, like me, say, sign me up. But I think over time, you would have people beginning to realize that this is just not a way to live, which I find I'm astonished to hear myself say this, to be honest with you. What I think I could tolerate, and I think what will be the case if we get to that point based on private industry, because I don't think NASA's ever going to fly people in space again. I think that what I could tolerate, in fact, I'm sure I could tolerate, is the idea of a mission. Maybe it's a 2-year mission, a 5-year mission. But when it's over, you come back to Earth and you get a little house and you sit on the porch and you think about your travels. And you got your rocking chair and your dog or your cat and, breeze and stuff. I'd be willing to ride in a commercial jet for years to see things and come back. I'd be willing to put up with it. But the idea that I'd do it forever, I don't know. Now, there is a couple other interesting things in your question here, Ian. One of them is that I'm not taking into account the absolutely astonishing ability of humans to adapt to just about anything. You read about the story of the lives in these camps. There were people, I just read this yesterday, people in punishment cells in the Gulag, and they would go in to the delousing station, but in the punishment cells it was very, very wet and very damp during the summertime. And they said that when they took off their clothes, the bed bugs and the lice came off of them in sheets, in handfuls of them. They just came off of them. That's a bit of a wake-up call. And when a new prisoner came to the cell in the camp or in the prison, which were designed to hold 5 people and in many cases held 40 or 50. I know that seems impossible, but they literally stacked themselves like cordwood. That's just happened. But whenever somebody new came into the cell, there were never enough sleeping accommodations, so they had to sleep on the floor. And the very new people had to sleep on the floor next to the bucket, which was the only latrine in the cell. And during the course of the night, these people would just be urinated on and defecated on. Most of the prisoners in there had dysentery. And as time went on and your seniority increased, you got to move further and further away from the latrine bucket, living in a mud floor, going out to work in conditions where it was routine. They didn't stop work in the Gulag until it got to 60 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. 50 or 60 degrees was the cutoff point, below zero. And these people are out there digging canals with their bare hands. They're using the tools that the Soviets had were so primitive that, and the lives of their people so cheap. And these were the best people they had. They're some of the best people in the world. They'd send them out there 35, 40 degrees below zero. They haven't had anything to eat. They're starving to death. They can barely walk. They're so weak. They give them wooden shovels with essentially just like a paddle, to just kind of heave the stuff across. No mechanized anything. Every single rock, everything taken out of that White Sea Canal and everything else that they built the entire center and north of the country, these prisoners, these Zeks. And you hear stories about these people were being ordered to go out into 30, 40, 50 degrees below zero and dig with their bare hands because they didn't have any tools. With their bare hands, dig into this frozen earth. And still, they managed to stay alive. And they managed to stay alive. And Solzhenitsyn said that the only way he did it was to realize that his life was absolutely over, and that he had a sort of a transcendental clarification, almost like a purification, because he realized pretty early, as I recall in the book anyway, he realized pretty early that one of the causes of the greatest stress and anxiety of being a Zek, being one of these prisoners, was to own anything at all. If you had a little tiny wooden bowl, or if you had a decent pair of boots, all you did was worry about them, and somebody was going to steal them anyway. They put the politicals in there with hardened criminals and murderers, and had nothing to lose. By the way, the Soviet state considered the murderers and rapists to be socially friendly elements. They were stealing from the bourgeoisie, and they just got some bad habits. But you'd have criminal murderers, cutthroats and thieves and rapists in a cell, 4, 5, 6 of them in a cell with 25, 30, 40, history professors and conductors of, orchestras and chemists and stuff, and just a couple of bashed heads and maybe the slit throat or two. Pretty much do whatever you want to. And they sent these people out with these tools. And of all the things I remember hearing about the tools, the one thing I'll never forget was they would send them out to cut trees in the north in these freezing conditions. And what they gave them for a saw was a flat piece of metal with notches, teeth cut out of this flat piece of thin metal, just snipped out with tin snips, floppy tin, no teeth, just snipping out on a regular edge on one side. They had to saw down those trees. And if they didn't do them, they didn't get to them enough, then they didn't eat. The more work you did, the more food you got. The less work you did, the less food you got. So you're either on a survival spiral or a death spiral is pretty much it. Once you get so weak that you can't work anymore, you just get weaker and weaker and weaker until you die. So when you talk about things like spaceflight, and I talk about how kind of not inhuman but anti-human that environment is, I come back to the fact that some of these people lived in these camps for 20 years and managed to adapt. And a few of them were more comfortable in the camps than they were outside. Once they got out of the camps, by the way, they weren't welcomed with open arms back into society. They went into something called internal exile, where they had no papers, no internal passport. No one would risk hiring them, because to hire a political was to basically just beg to be investigated or put in up camps yourself. So some of these people who'd endured unimaginable hardship and torture basically found themselves out in society and decided they wanted to go back, because even if it was just a lump of bread, that was they were sure to get their lump of bread. So people can adapt to anything, and if you gave me a choice of going into a space colony or spending any time in one of Stalin's gulags, I can tell you which one I would answer with, and right quick too. Do maybe 2 more, something like that. Steve Darrow, back again. What was the most important moment during World War II? When Hitler decided to bomb cities instead of RAF bases? When Admiral Nagumo decided to rearm his planes? When Field Marshal Paulus surrendered? Or when the Higgins boat ramps hit the Normandy beaches? Do you have another? Well, it's not the last two. That's an excellent question. I love these in-the-weeds historical questions. So basically what Stephen's done here is taken 4 of what are considered to be the key turning points in World War II, and I'm just going to walk them backwards. Higgins boats hitting Normandy beaches. The invasion, the D-Day invasion, Operation Overlord, was very, very important. Very important. But it wasn't... to have been repulsed, to have that invasion have failed, would not have cost the Allies the war. It just simply wouldn't have cost them the war. It would have been a catastrophe, and it may have been the biggest catastrophe in military history, but it would not have changed the war's outcome if we had failed at Normandy. If we'd failed at Normandy, we would probably have continued our strategy that Churchill liked, which was basically the soft underbelly of the crocodile, and we would have continued, the Allies had Africa, we'd continue to take Africa, we'd move into Sicily, Italy, and so on, put all our forces there. War probably wouldn't have ended till 47 or 48 or something, but the Normandy invasion had failed. I don't think it would have cost the Allies the war. But there are some things that might have cost the war. Field Marshal Paulus surrendering, Field Marshal Paulus surrendered at Stalingrad. And I don't think that would have changed the war either. On one hand, you can just clear this up very quickly by saying that what Paulus surrendered wasn't an army. It wasn't a Sixth Army anymore. It was just a bunch of frozen, starving skeletons who had, aged 70 years in the 6 months they were there. And Stalingrad was so deep inside the Soviet Union that the failure to defend Stalingrad, if Paulus had won, if the Germans had won at Stalingrad, there's the rest of the Soviet Union. They would have just moved behind the Ural Mountains, and then they would just massed and come back at them. The Germans had no chance to beat the Russians, none. And we know this is true because they did such unspeakable damage to them in the first really first year of the war. I don't realize that just the shocking unpreparedness of the Soviet forces. I think my understanding is it's something like 96% of all the combat aircraft on the front facing the Germans were destroyed in the first, certainly within the first 3 or 4 days, probably within the first day or two. 96% of them. So it's not like the Germans got bad breaks, Stalin executes his entire military, something like 70, 80, 90% of the top officers, including Tukhachevsky, who really seemed like he knew what he was doing. And the Russians are pushed back for, a distance. It's practically the distance of all of Europe. In fact, it's more than that in some cases. So if Hitler had won in Stalingrad, he just would have been deeper in Stalingrad. Now, what could have turned the war was something that I didn't see you mention here, because the other two absolutely could have turned the war. What could have turned the war was if it was the Yugoslavs or the Greeks hadn't got uppity just before Hitler was ready to go into Russia. There was a coup in Yugoslavia, and the pro-Hitler guy was overthrown. And Hitler went into Yugoslavia and leveled the place. And something also had to happen. I think he had to go into Greece as well in order to secure his flank because Yugoslavia fell. If that little revolution in Yugoslavia hadn't happened, Hitler would have stepped off a month earlier than he did on July 22nd. He would have stepped off in early June. And since the Nazis got within 12 miles, I think, of the center of Moscow, advanced reconnaissance units clearly see the onion domes of St. Basil's and so on. If Hitler had stepped off a month earlier, I think it's very likely that he would have taken Moscow in the first winter. And if he'd done that, that might have been a game changer. The Soviets would have retreated. They put everything of value on trains and just headed them east. It's one of my favorite things. I really do have a deep appreciation, I hope, certainly for an American, for the Russian sense of humor, which is a very, it's dark, but it's extremely ironic and referential, and it's just every now and then I hear something and I just get it. I just get these Russian jokes. So as Moscow was getting closer and closer, the Germans were getting closer and closer to Moscow in the first winter of the war, and it looked like they were going to have to evacuate the city. All of these bureaucrats, all the communists, all the officials, all of these people who had just, for 20 years, 20 years or so, 25 years, had just been living high on the hog, all of these Communist Party officials got on this road and started hightailing it to the east to get behind the Ural Mountains before Hitler got there. And the Russian people called this route the Highway of Enthusiasts. I just find that really, I just get it. The Highway of Enthusiasts. They are enthusiastically leaving the city. But if that hadn't happened and Hitler had another month, if he'd been able to go a month earlier, I think very likely would have taken Moscow before winter hit, and that means his troops would have been in Moscow during the winter. They would have been out there freezing to death. When the Soviet counterattack happened on the German positions, just after that winter, and Stalin pulled all his eastern armies to the west, the Germans were out in the field. But if the Germans had been in the city of Stalingrad, I think it would have been it. I think it would have put Russia out of the war. And if Russia was put out of the war, then you got a whole other game. Russia probably took 3/4 of the Nazi effort. The Americans and the British made up the other 25%, but the Americans took pretty much all of the Japanese. So let's look at the other two, since we're deep in the weeds with this historical questions that I like so much. So we talked about von Paulus and Stalingrad. The two prior to that were when Admiral Nagumo decided to rearm his planes. I think about Midway all the time, Steve. You can't look at World War II without, thinking Pearl Harbor, you bastards, and how unprepared we were, and just the shock of it and everything. And then the Pacific War turned in 5 minutes. It's not an exaggeration. It's not hyperbole. The Americans won the war in 5 minutes. That's the amount of time it took for the dive bombers from the American fleet to take out, sink 3 Japanese carriers and got the 4th one the next day. 5 minutes. And the reason they got them was because the bombers had loaded iron bombs for an attack on Midway Island. And American torpedo squadron, especially torpedo squadron from USS Enterprise, had tried to attack the Japanese fleet, and every single one of them just shot out of the sky. I think everybody was killed on the first wave, and Ensign Gay was on a later wave. He's the only guy in his entire squadron who survived. He sat in the middle of the Battle of Midway on a raft and watched the whole thing happen and ducked under the water because Japanese destroyers tried to machine gun him every now and then. But the planes were preparing to strike Midway Island, and the American attacks had been so ineffective, just like it's like a girl swatting a wasp away, annoying, but the entire torpedo squadrons. You sent an entire squadron of torpedo bombers in there, Avengers, I guess, or maybe it was before the Avengers. In any event, you sent these torpedo bombers in there, and not a single hit, not a single hit on anything. And so the Japanese thought, okay, we pretty much have this under control. But then they found the American fleet. They got a report of where the fleet was. We detected their fleet much earlier than they detected ours. Early enough so that it made a difference. And so the Japanese commander, Admiral Nagumo, basically says, okay, instead of launching these planes right now with the bombs on them, keep them on the deck, and we'll put torpedoes on them, because we're going to go after the American fleet. And this process took maybe 10, 15 minutes. And during that 15 minutes, where all of the weapons were on the deck, torpedoes on the deck, bombs on the deck, that's when the American dive bombers came in. The Japanese air cover, the Zero Combat Air Patrol, fighter jets that were over the fleet, Japanese fleet defending against air attacks, those the combat air patrol had been dropped from what was probably, I don't know, just guessing now, 15, 18,000 feet, something like that. And when the American torpedo bombers come in very, very low. They have to drop that thing from 20 feet above the surface of the water. So when the American torpedo attacks came in, the Japanese air cover descended, took them out, just massacred them. But during that critical 5 minutes, two things happened. First of all, the decks of all four Japanese carriers were loaded with airplanes and loaded with munitions. They were just sitting on the deck. And the combat air patrol that would have stopped or at least slowed down the American dive bombers, which come in from very high altitude, wasn't up there. It was down on the deck after having shot down the American torpedo bombers. So the next thing you know, these squadrons, a couple squadron of American dive bombers rather, appear at high altitude above the fleet. And these guys start their run. And in 5 minutes, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers are burning. And it's not just the loss of the carriers. It's the loss of the planes, although it's not just the loss of the planes either. The mortal wound to the Japanese fleet was the loss of the pilots. These were guys who'd gained just tons and tons of experience at Pearl Harbor and all throughout the Pacific and Singapore and Philippines and all the rest. They're best pilots in the world. And they had incredible airplanes. And for them to lose 4 carriers and the airplanes, because every single airplane, where's the airplane going to go? You've got 4 carriers out there. They're all at the bottom of the ocean. You essentially lose the entire air fleet. They never recovered from it. And interesting little quirks of history are the Doolittle raid, which was essentially just a publicity stunt, a lot of people say, where we sent B-25s to attack the Japanese mainland. I think we damaged a factory slightly and hit a school or something. It was mostly just to hit back. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, we hit them back. And everybody said, they didn't cause any damage. It's true, it didn't cause any damage, but it psychologically upset the Japanese so much that the emperor's mainland had been bombed that they took really big, it didn't seem like a big risk at the time. They basically went for all the marbles. We're just going to go out and sail out to Midway and destroy the American fleet. That's it. They bombed us once. We're going to go out there and we're going to just going to nail them to the wall. Our code breakers had figured out the Japanese code. We had a pretty good idea. We had it figured out. But we weren't sure. I'm going to get the letter wrong probably, but I want to say that the Japanese had assigned the letter K. It was a letter, let's just say it was K, to Midway. And the Americans were pretty sure that K meant Midway, but we weren't positive. So what they did was they told the commander at Midway to send a message that we were running low on water. And then a day later or a couple hours later, they intercept Japanese transmissions, and the Japanese transmissions say that K is low on water, so they realized that this letter was Midway. And therefore, when the fleet is heading to K, they had a pretty good idea where they were going, and basically he just, Nimitz just waited for them. He just parked 3 aircraft carriers out there, Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown, I think, and waited for them. And in 5 minutes, that was the end of the war for the Pacific. It got much, much worse before it got better, but after Midway, it was. They never ever got the initiative again, ever. So 5 minutes won the war. If Nagumo had not done that, if he had chosen to launch his bombers with iron bombs, then those weapons wouldn't have been on the deck. It seems very unlikely that they would have got as much damage on those carriers as they did. But the heroism of those guys, especially the torpedo bomber guys, like those guys just went in. The American torpedoes were the worst pieces of crap in the world. They probably could have put all 12 or whatever, 16 of them right into the side of the ship, and maybe 3 would have detonated. They were miserable, terrible things. But we learned. And yeah, Midway was amazing. So back to the first one, which is the one that's most interesting to me, I think. I never quite got this exactly right, but I think basically this is the system of events. What is AF? It's people saying that Midway was designated AF. Sorry, those are the letters AF, not K. Sorry, thank you, AF. So AF is out of water. well before this, during the Battle of Britain, the RAF is taken on these Luftwaffe pilots. Churchill thought he'd have to face the Luftwaffe from 200 miles away. They were devastators. They weren't. Yeah, they weren't Avengers yet. Thanks, guys. Maybe those were the dive bombers. Yeah, because they were crap, I think. Anyway, whatever. Helldivers came after that. It doesn't matter. In any event, back to the Britain thing. So the British are sending up their guys in Spitfires and Hurricanes. Hurricanes did most of the heavy lifting of the Battle of Britain, and they're doing pretty well against the Germans for a while. But then the Germans really start to turn up the heat and the numbers, and the British pilots are just exhausted, and they were doing amazing things recovering parts from airplanes that were shot down. So it was actually a pilot shortage that was limiting the RAF. They were putting more airplanes into the field than they had at the beginning of the war through miracles of, improvisation and stuff. But the Germans were really starting to succeed. And instead, the Germans they started off going after the ships in the channel, and they switched to trying to take out the radar towers, and then they switched to going after RAF airfields. And when they started going after the RAF airfields, they were having so much success that Fighter Command said in anywhere from 3 to 7 days, depending on luck, we will be unable to put enough airplane in the sky to have any significant effect on them. We simply won't have any bases. We won't have any place to land, and we won't have any place to refuel or any of that stuff. We've got about a week or less. If the Germans had kept up their strategy, that would have been it. Knock the RAF out of the war. Put Britain to its knees. I don't think he was ever planning to invade Britain. I don't think it was ever consideration seriously of Hitler. I think he launched all these Operation Sea Lion barges just as a bargaining chip. I think he was terrified of the water. But just when it looked like the RAF was going to be knocked out of the game, I'm pretty sure this was the sequence of events. A German bomber crew was over London, and they had not attacked the city yet. And they couldn't find their targets, so they just basically dropped their bombs and head home, and they happened to be over London and bombed London. So Churchill the next day says, all right, you want to do that, fine. So Churchill sends a raid of Lancasters, or maybe it wasn't even Lancasters that early in the war, sends a raid of probably Halifax bomber, something like that. He sends a bombing raid over Berlin, not significant compared to the later ones, probably 30 planes, something like that. We had 1,000 bomber raids later in the war. But as a result of bombing London, Churchill bombs Berlin. And Hitler becomes so incensed that Berlin had been bombed, just so incensed. And Goering was so embarrassed that the Germans, basically, Hitler got off on one of his frothy mouth raves and said, for every one of us that's destroyed, we'll destroy 100 of them. For every bomb they ran on us, we'll send 10,000 bombs or whatever the number was, and we were going to bomb the British out of the war. So he gave the order to switch strategies from bombing the RAF airfields to bombing the cities. Now, that was a hard blow for the people of Britain, but it saved the British in the war because the RAF had a chance to rebuild their airfields, their fleets, retrain some guys, get some other guys back in the air. That was probably the single biggest mistake that Hitler made. A couple people have said miracle of Dunkirk. Again, I think Dunkirk is a lot like Stalingrad or what was the other one? Or Normandy. If Normandy had failed, it wouldn't have been the end of the war. It would have been a catastrophe, but it wouldn't have been the end of the war. Likewise, if Dunkirk hadn't happened, if the Germans had pressed on, their tanks had been running for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they stopped and tried to let the Luftwaffe take what was left of the British Expeditionary Force and survivors of France and Belgium and so on, these forces. And the Sandy Beach, the bombs weren't going off, and so the British basically send every single little fishing boat, skiff, rowboat, sailboat, everything, send everything they got over, and they bring in these guys over, and sometimes in destroyers, one destroyer was sunk, took 700 people with it, something like that. But they come back in 2s and 3s and 20s and 50s, depending on the size of the ship or the boat, and these British civilians just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they thought they'd be lucky to get 30,000 of the 500,000 people that were on the beach. They thought they'd be lucky to get 30,000 of them away. And they ended up getting something like 420,000. Almost all of them got off the mainland because of Dunkirk. But again, just my personal amateur opinion. It's just, I think about these things. If they hadn't gotten them off, if the Germans had either killed or captured the British Expeditionary Force, I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the war. Losing the battle over Britain would have cost them the war. But losing soldiers in Europe, in other words, when they evacuated Dunkirk, the Germans owned the entire continent. And if they'd killed all the guys at Dunkirk, they still would have owned the continent. There would have been 300,000 troops that weren't available, but the British weren't really doing big offensive operations that year or the year after or the year after or the year after. So, you'd be out 300, 400,000 guys, but I don't want to say those people, those soldiers didn't do anything. Needless to say they did, and needless to say their lives were worth saving. All of that said, it wasn't like, it wasn't going to be the game changer, but losing control of the skies probably would have knocked Britain out of the war. And with Britain out of the war, Hitler could have turned his full attention on the Russians. And that might have made the difference considering how close he got. And furthermore, the British, to their enormous credit, were, they were conducting offensive operations in Africa and so on, but they had essentially very little manpower, and the entire merchant marine and their navy was tied up trying to keep their supplies coming in past the U-boats. It was a near thing. And I remember the main thing about knocking Britain out of the war that early in 1940, would have been that all of the American invasion of Europe, certainly Northern Europe and Italy and so on, basically staged out of Great Britain. It was the world's biggest aircraft carrier. The British Isles were an unsinkable aircraft carrier where you could mass enormous amounts of troops, and all of our bomber squadrons were based there, our fighter squadrons were based there. If Britain had not been there, if that gigantic aircraft carrier hadn't been 20 miles off the coast of France, how would we have gotten over there? How would we have done what we did? We couldn't have bombed them from the mainland. If Hitler had beaten the Russians early, and Japan had basically held its own, could the United States have held out long enough and beaten them? My personal theory is yes, just because of our industrial might. But it would have been us taking 20 million casualties, not the Russians. 20 million killed. That's just soldiers, another 20 million civilians. Anyway, I'll do one more because that's a kind of a sad topic, and I know, like I said, it was mostly in the weeds, but thanks, Steve. That was a lot of fun. And finally, Stephen Halas says, I'm still waiting for word that you received my custom-made wooden U.S. flag with your logo engraved on it. FedEx reports it was delivered on September 8th, 2017. Please respond. Thank you. Stephen, I am so sorry. We had a personnel shift here in the office. It is here. I asked the people when it came, which was right around that time. We basically had an entire staff switch. So my deep apologies for having not gotten back to you on that, and thank you very much for it. It's in the other room where the office is, and it's a work of art, and I'm deeply embarrassed. In fact, I'm mortified by this. I didn't have any idea until just a second that no one had contacted you, but great thanks for the present, which always blows me away. It's a beautiful thing, and I am very sorry that we didn't get back to you. So I'll see if we can straighten out what happened. Just sack the people that made the titles, and then sack the people that sacked those people. But I'm very sorry about that. I genuinely am. I didn't know about it until just now. So we did get it, and it was beautiful. All right, I think that'll probably do it. Yeah, I still have a couple little things to do, honey. Maybe 15, 20 minutes tops, I'd say. And then, can we see it? Yes, we can. Hang on one second. Good idea. Please play some appropriate music or something. I'll be right back. Look at that beauty. That's astonishing. It's just such beautiful work. And for those of you that think that this might be painted, no. Look at this. It's all workmanship. It's all woodworking. It's absolutely beautiful. And I am mortified is probably not strong enough term for how I feel about that, Stephen, that we didn't get back to you on this. It's just, we have been, the NRA shows and stuff, we've just been completely underwater, and we lost a lot of continuity. But in any event, I'm deeply sorry we didn't mention it to you earlier. It's spectacular. You can't really, there's no way that you can appreciate this at home. And I, for the life of me, do not know how he did it. But the seams on this are just, they're just, you couldn't get a razor blade between them. I just have no idea how that was built so unbelievably precisely. I mean, it just looks like one solid piece of wood, but it's a series of strips, and it's an absolute work of art, and we're very grateful. We're always very grateful for the presence. And by the way, Stephen, let me just do this before I forget. We're going to need and there it is. So you'll be able to see it every show from now on. And again, I am deeply, deeply sorry that happened. So there you go. Hope you can forgive me. It was a beautiful thing. We saw it when it came in, and I'd said we need to write a thank you note, and it just got dropped. So sorry about that. Yes, and as Dave Big Booty points out, Captain Kirk went from the top shelf down to the bottom shelf, because that is just unbelievably nice. Okay, that'll do it for the show today. I've got a home to get to, and other things are proceeding well. Oh, last thing, I mentioned this also in a members-only video. Prior to the Vegas horror, I had shot a firewall called The Story of Friendlyism. And one of the things that we made a decision on, what I learned from the NRA experience, was that it's a combination of things. We had heard anecdotally, and then we saw the data that said that the more produced a show is, the fewer people watch it. That was disturbing, but I've been talking about that for quite a while. But it's absolutely true. And when we were talking about shows like Firewall, Time Over Target, Nexus Report, they were all green screen, heavily post-production things. I had to go into the room there, get all mic'd up, load the teleprompter, get these things in there and do them. And then it just was an enormous amount of work, not just on the post-production end either, but just getting in there to do it. And when I realized that that the more produced something is, the less it gets seen, I took those two things together, and with the experience of the Hot Mic show and the morning show, firewalls are going to be done from the other set. There we go. And I'm going to put the fire effects in the TV screen. The bad news is it may not look as good to those of you who are used to all the bells and whistles and flash and special effects. That's the bad news. The good news is I think we can do one a week. So there we go. That'll do it for the Stratosphere Lounge episode number 166. Brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com, the numbers of which we expect are going to rise in the month to come, because this is going to be a membership drive. And if you want to be part of the army that is out there, slaying these zombies who simply walk around looking for brains, the zombies who never hear a different opinion, who just simply continue to believe things that aren't true and just stagger through their lives completely unaware. Don't you worry, Facebook and YouTube is protecting these people. They're suppressing conservative messages. They're demonetizing conservative channels. They're, as I say, using their algorithms to suppress the spread of these things. They're making videos about the Electoral College, something that you have to be 18 or older to watch, and so on and so on and so on. And the reason that they're doing all of these things is because it's working. So we're going to need your help to stop this zombie apocalypse. We're going to have to basically buy our way out of this quarantine zone, which they are so proud. But we're going to get that message in there anyway, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So if you ever decided you ever really did want to, ammo up, get together with a bunch of, good people and hang out, get a couple hot dogs and a beer or two, and then just face the zombie apocalypse together, well then, by God, this is the place to do it. So we're going to be doing this Blocktober promotion starting tomorrow, I think, Blocktober, because we're blocked from Facebook. And one of our new office people really has done a great job with some of the graphics and the design, and it's just going to be fun, and I'd like to have started with it Monday, but bigger and more important things happen. So in any event, that'll do it. Thanks very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to see all of you, and I expect we'll see you next week, and if we don't, I'll let you know why, but we will see you again soon. Thanks very much for being with us, and take care of yourselves. We'll see you next week. Hit the button, Frank. Oh, God. There we go. I knew there's a button around here.